Alright, welcome to this solution for the MECC Excel case. This is Feeding Excelopolis, and it's the Junior Varsity edition. So this is a case about a fictional population that will need to farm the land for food, and we need to model how much food they can obtain, how much is eaten, and how the population grows. So the setup is that the population will start with one person. They'll pick the best cell to farm, so the maximum value. That will give them 5 food. They'll also have to eat some food, so each person will eat 2 food, which would leave us with 3 in the bank in storage. So by the end of the case, we'll kind of model this out, and when the food bank reaches a certain level, we'll be able to increase the population by 1. So when that happens, we can then farm 2 cells at a time and 3 cells and so on based on our population number. So let's get into the solution. I'll solve the main questions first and then come back and solve all of the bonuses at the end. So let's start off with question 1. The way each question is set up is as following. We have a cell address and then we have the fertility of each of those cells. So this kind of corresponds to this blue part of the grid that we looked at earlier. The numbers in the blue grid are changing every question. We don't actually need to concern ourselves too much with the cell addresses because we just care about the best land cells we can pick out of this range. So the first question here is asking us how much food would be produced if citizens were able to work all of the cells. So all we're being asked to do is sum up all of the numbers. So to do that, we can use the sum formula. That will take in any range of numbers and add them together. So once we've solved that, we can double click this fill handle in the bottom corner and it will spill the same formula down for each of our answers. Next up, question 2, what's the highest land fertility value for each game? So here we just need to find the maximum value out of each row. And to do that, we can just use the max formula. So max, again, just like sum, will take in a range and just give us back what the biggest one is. So the maximum there is 5. Let's spill that down again, and we've answered all the questions. All right, question 3. What is the sum of the 2 highest land fertility values in each game? Well, we just saw how to get the biggest value in question 2 with the max formula. Now we need to know how to get the second biggest value. So there is a formula that does this, and it's called large. So we can say equals large. And this formula first takes in an array, and then the second argument is a number of which one we want. So if we use 1, it will give us the first largest. If we use 2, it will give us the second largest, and so on. So we could say 2 there, and that gives us the second largest value. So great, at this point we could use our solution from question 2 to find the maximum one, and then we could add this on to get the 2 biggest. However, I'm going to show you a more general solution that will scale up to level 4 quite nicely, and that is as follows. So we can use sequence to spill an array. So let's just do a sequence of 9 for a moment. And then we could use this large formula. I'm just going to lock our cell there. And I'm going to use the number here as our second argument. So if I drag that down, you'll see I get the first largest, then the second, and so on. You'll see this is in order, of course. However, the nice thing about the large formula is that it can actually take an array of inputs. So we can get the first largest to the 9th largest by selecting that whole array. Let's delete what's below. And there we go. We can see now we have an array formula that takes all the values. So we could move this sequence part of the formula into here, and that gives us all 9 values in order. Well, we only want 2 here, so let's change that to sequence of 2, and then we could sum them together to get the sum of those numbers. So that's the sum of the 2 largest figures. So we have 3 embedded formulas here, so let's break it down one more time. So first of all, we get a sequence of 2. Then we use the large formula with that sequence of 2. That gives us the 2 largest items, and then we sum them all up. So now just for practice, I'm going to write it one more time. I want the sum of the largest 2 things from this array. So large, that array, sequence of 2. I close all my brackets, and that will be the answer. Question 4, now we want the sum of the X highest land fertility values. And this is exactly the same question as we had before, but instead of the largest 2, we're having the largest 6, then 7, then 3, and so on. So we can copy the formula down from before, and we can change the piece inside our sequence. Instead of being the largest 2, we can now use this cell, so it varies. So it will be the largest 6. At this point, we can drag that down, and if we just enter some of these formulas, we can see we're now using this variable cell to change the number of items in our sequence. Okay, question 5. Based on the given number of people and land fertility values, how much extra food is produced? So this is where we start to think about modelling how much food is produced and then used. So we can use the exact same formula from level 4 to get how much food is produced. So this is taking the largest 3 items out of this array and summing them up. So this is the 3 highest land values, i.e. how much food we produce. To get the excess food, we need to minus off how much food is used up. And in the instructions at the start of the case, we know that the people require 2 food each to survive. So we need to minus off 2 times the number of people to get how much food will be left over from what we farmed. So we drag that down, and that's the answer to question 5. Okay, question 6. Based on the given land fertility and assuming a starting population of 1 and no growth, how much food has been saved after the given number of turns? So if we know that the population is 1 and it will stay at 1, then how much food can we get each turn? Well, it's the max of these values. So each turn we can get 5 food. Now let's multiply that by the number of turns, which is given in the question. So in the first question it's only actually 1. So over all the turns, this is how much food we get, and then we need to minus off how much is eaten. So again, it's 2 food per person. We only have 1 person, so it's 2 times the number of turns, because they need to eat on every turn. So that will be our answer for question 6. Okay, question 7, the very hard question of the case. So based on the given land fertility and assuming a starting population of 1 and the population can grow, how many units of food are produced over the first 10 turns? So for this question, we really need to build out a full model of all 10 turns. So I'm going to build a model in a fresh new tab for one of the questions, and then I'm going to change the inputs of that model to answer it for all of them. So let's start a new tab. I'm going to eventually do this with a data table, and I'll show you how to set it up, so don't worry too much, but I'm going to say example 7, and then I'm going to say XLOOKUP this cell, example 7, which is hard-coded currently, in this column, and return all of the inputs here. So what that will do is it will give me my inputs for example 7. So this is all of the land fertility values. Now the point of me doing it in this way with an XLOOKUP is because it means I can change this cell to any question number. So if we look here, we start at question 121. If I change this cell to 121, I will change my inputs to match. So 122, we have these inputs and so on. So let's go back to example 7 for a second. With this setup, I can build a model using these numbers and then just change my question number to get a new answer each time. So whenever I build a model, I like to do it as fully laid out as possible, and I'll start with the headers of things I need to know. So I need to know the start population. I need to know the food that they gain, so let's say food gain. I also need to know how much they eat, so let's say food use. I also actually want to know what turn number we're on, because we're doing 10 turns, so let's say turn at the start. I need to know the net food, so how much is left over. I need to know what's in the bank, so the food bank. I need to know the threshold to grow our population, so let's say growth threshold. And I also need to know whether the population grows. So we know we're modelling 10 turns, so let's start with a sequence of 10. I'm just going to centre everything up as well, so it's a little bit neater on the eyes, and I'll put these in bold. That's Control B. The start population we know is always 1, so I'll manually enter a 1 into that cell. And the food gain is going to be the sum of the largest X cells, where X is the population. So with 1, it's just the largest 1. If our population was 2, it would be the largest 2, and so on. So we already did that in question 4. So let's do it again here. It's the sum of the largest. So sum of large, we're taking this array, and let's lock it with F4. And then we want a sequence of our population number. So that's actually start population, cell C6. Let's close all of our brackets, and then we have how much food we can gain on the turn. Our food use is going to be 2 per person, so it's 2 times the population. So our net food is the gain minus how much we use, so we get 3 food left over on that turn. Food bank obviously starts at 0, so it's just going to be the net food for now. Our growth threshold is told to us in the instructions to the case, and that is 10 times the population. So let's say 10 times our start population. So how do we know if we grow or not? Well, we grow if the amount of food stored in the food bank is greater than the threshold. So let's say equals, the food bank amount is greater than or equal to the threshold. So this will evaluate to a true or false based on that condition. So that's turn 1 done. Now let's think about turn 2 and the rest of the model. So what is the new population? The new population is going to be if this is true, then it's going to be the population from before plus 1. Otherwise, it's going to be our start population. Our food gain is going to be the same formula from before. So is our food use. So is our net food. But the food bank is going to be slightly different. So our food bank is going to be how much food we gained on the turn plus what was in the bank before. However, there's one more tricky thing here, and that is that if the population grows, we have to minus the growth threshold out of the food bank. So let's say minus if this, so if the population grows, then we're going to take this number otherwise it's 0. So now whenever that's a true, we'll be taking off the growth threshold out of our food bank. The growth threshold is the same, it's always 10 times our population. And whether we grow, that formula is exactly the same. It's whether the food bank is greater than the threshold. So now if we drag this down, we should have a model for the full 10 turns. And once you've built a model like this, it's always good to just have a visual check of whether it looks like it's behaving correctly. So we can see that the population should grow on turn 4, which means in turn 5, our population increases by 1. Our food bank went down by 10 times the population, so that was 10, but we gained 5 from before, so 12 goes down to 2, and then it goes up by 5 to 7, so that's working correctly, and so on. And the question was asking us how much food was gained in total over the 10 turns, so that's the sum of all of these numbers. To find the sum, you can type equals sum, and then highlight your range. A quicker way that I like to do is to press Alt and equals, and that will just auto sum everything above you. So there we go. So let's put bold on that, that's Control B. Whenever I have a total, especially if I'm at work, I like to put some visual borders on, turn grid lines off. Obviously that's all personal preference. So we're matching the answer for example 7. Now let's just show you how to get the answer for 121. So we can change this cell to 121, and that will give us 95, which is the answer to that question, and 122 is 89. But doing this manually is quite tedious. So let's go back to example 7 and show you how to do that exact process for all of the question numbers. So we gather all of the question numbers here, and then we're going to use a tool in Excel called What If Analysis. And we're going to ask the question, what does this cell here turn to if we change this cell A1 to each of these things in turn? So the way we set up a data table is we put our answer above the top of the table. So we're going to say equals that. And we start in this corner, and we highlight down, and we press Alt-D-T. That brings up a data table menu. Alternatively, you can go into data here. You have this what if analysis section, and you can click data table. And what this data table will do is tell us what the answer is if the input changes to all of the cells down our column. So because they're down in a column, we need to use this column input cell and then say which one we're varying. So we're going to vary this cell A1 here. So if we click that, we get A1. And if we press OK, we will run the model for all of our inputs. So data tables are a nice tool to know. I have a full video on them on my own channel if you want to check that out. It's called Excel and Finance, the channel. So if this didn't sink in the first time, go and have a look at that, and that should help you out. So let's copy all of our answers to the questions here and paste them in. And that should be all of the main questions done. Okay, so now that we've done all the main levels, let's move on to the bonuses. So bonus 1, how many times does the most common land fertility value for a single cell occur? So we need to gather up all of the question inputs into one place and find which one occurs most often and how many times that is. So I'm going to do this on a new tab. One way you can gather up all the question info is to use the VStack formula. So if you say VStack, you can give it as many inputs as you want, and it will just stack everything on top of one another. So if I click this, I can press Control-Shift down right to highlight the whole range, scroll down a bit. If I keep hold of Control, I can click a new area, Control-Shift down and right, and so on and so on. And that will gather up all of the things there from question 1 and 2. I could do that for 7 questions, but that's a little bit slow. A method I prefer for these cases is to use the filter formula. So the filter takes in a list of things you want to filter. So I want to filter all of the question info. So that's column G to O. So I have to manually come in here and type O because there's some merged cells going on. And I want to filter that for where column B is a number. So if I wrap B in is number here, what that formula will do is it will filter all of the question info for where column B is a number. And we can see that column B is only a number for where there's a question. So if I do that, we'll gather all of it in one go, and that's nice and quick. So row 1 here corresponds to game 1, row 2 corresponds to game 2, and so on and so on. So how do we find the most common thing? Well, we're told in the instructions that the numbers only run from 2 to 5. So let's list those out. Then what we want to do is count how many of these things are in this range. We can use the COUNTIF formula. So COUNTIF takes in a range. So here's our range, and we need to lock it. So we'll press F4 to do that. And then it takes an item that we're trying to count in that range. So our item is 2. So if we close that, it will tell us how many 2s appear. So we drag that down, and we've done it for all possible items. So we can see that the number 5 appears most times with 355 occurrences. So bonus 1, the answer is 355. Okay, bonus 2, which game number has the most fertile land, i.e. the sum of the fertility values? So let's come back to where we've gathered all of our questions. We'll delete out these workings for now. And we want to do the sum of the row. So Alt equals is our shortcut, and then Enter to get the sum. I'm just going to put this in bold and a slightly different color just so we can differentiate that from the actual question information. And we're looking for the game number with the highest value here. So let's figure out what the highest value is. So that's the max of these numbers. So it's 43. And then we want to know where that occurs down here. So we can use the X match formula for that. So we can say X match, and what that does is takes in a value, and then it takes in a range of where we're looking for it. So if we do that, it will specify the row that it's in. So it's in row 53, that corresponds to game 53, so that is our answer. Okay, bonus 3, what is the maximum number of plots of lowest fertile land, i.e. most values of 2 within a game? So let's come back to our game info, and let's delete out our other workings. What we're asking for is how many 2s are in each game, and which one has the most. So we can use COUNTIF again, so we can say COUNTIF, this range says a 2. So we see there are 3 2s in that range. Let's drag that down. If we want to find the max, the quickest way is to look down here. If you don't have it down there, you can actually right click and add a load more things. So I've added minimum, maximum, sum, average, just so I have all that info at hand whenever I hover over a range. Alternatively, of course, you can just use the max formula. The maximum we have is 6 number 2s. So 6 is our answer. Okay, next up, what is the most common answer across all games? So let's come back to our games and let's change this to be the answer. So we're going to use this filter trick again. So we can actually just copy it out. But we want to filter the answer columns, and we know that the answers, if we just have a quick look, always in column E. So let's change that to be column E instead of G to O, and we'll get the answers to all of the questions. And bonus 4 is asking us for what the most common item is. So there's a few ways to do this. The quickest, if you're working with numbers, is to use the mode formula. So mode, you can use either mode multiple or mode single. Multiple is used when there's a draw. So if the number 1 and 2 both appeared 5 times, it would spill out 1 and 2. Let's just show you what that looks like. So let's do 1, 1, 2, 2. If I do equals mode mult of these, it will give me 1 and 2 returned. Those are the most common values. If I used mode single, so mode single, it would give me only one of those. So in this case, we can use either one. Sometimes it's safest to use mode multiple in case there are draws. We want to take that range. It tells us the most common is actually 9 and 10, so I think this may be a mistake in the case. 10 appears first, so let's go with a 10, and that is what the case actually wants in the answer file. Now, I'm just going to show you an alternative simple way to gather everything up, just in case you ever had text here instead of numbers, because with text you can't use the mode formulas. And the way you can do that is to say unique of all of this stuff. That gives us all of the numbers. Then we can say COUNTIF. Here's our range, let's lock it, and we want to count how many of those things appear. So if we do that, we can then sort it or whatever we like to find the biggest. So we can see that number 9 and 10 actually appear 17 times each, so there is a draw. The question doesn't have a true answer, but the case is looking for number 10, like I said. Okay, now what is the sum of the answers across all levels for odd game numbers? So we have all of the answers here already. Let's now spill a list of numbers. So you can say equals sequence. We have 140 games, I think. Let's go to the end to check that's right. Yep. Then we want to know if those are odd. So let's say is odd this. So is odd is just going to give us a true or false where something is odd. So we just want to sum all of the answers up where this is true. There's a few ways we can do that, but let's use the sum ifs formula. So sum ifs takes in a range you want to sum. So I want to sum up all my answers. And then it takes a column. So that's this column is a criteria I want to evaluate on. And the next argument is what this column needs to say. So we need it to say true, and that will sum all of the values in column J, where everything in column L says true. So the answer is 1746. 1746. A more advanced way you could do this kind of single cell is to say sequence. We have 140 questions, so divide that by 2 to get how many will be odd. We can start at number 1 and move in steps of 2. That will give us all of the odd numbers. And then we can use the index formula. So what the index formula does is pick out rows of an array. So we give it an array and then a number of rows. We've just told it what rows we want there with that sequence formula. So that's a way to do it single cell, and then you can sum all of that up. So if I sum that up, I will get 1746 just the same. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this solution, and I'll see you next time.